بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. The title for today's lecture is Maqasid and Ethics towards an Islamic ethical theory. Yesterday we briefly and roughly discussed different approaches or the contemporary approaches to Islamic ethics, specifically with the link of Maqasid al-Sharia. Now we will go beyond these approaches and to try to discuss some suggested approach ideas to establish a new an Islamic ethical theory in this regard. So I will focus in this lecture on Taha Abdurrahman's philosophy, the Moroccan philosopher that I already mentioned yesterday, and I promised you to give you some details about his view on this regard. So, but before that, I will focus on two main points in this lecture. The first one will be on Maqasid in contemporary studies. Yesterday, I only focused on the ethical approaches in contemporary studies. Now I will start with briefly to give you the directions or the main directions were invested, or the main directions were used the Maqasid Sharia in the contemporary times, and then I will focus on Taha Abdurrahman's view. Regarding to the first point, resorting to the idea of Maqasid in the modern era can be roughly summarized in three main directions. The first one is a general reform concerned with the context of cultural and political shock of the West in the late 19th century. The notion of Maqasid was used with a view to reconstructing the concept of public affairs, reforming religious education, and searching for progress. In this setting, borrowing from the West was deemed valid provided that it is in line with Islamic law and public interest. Hence, the Maqasid-based concept constituted a prelude to claiming the legitimacy of borrowing from the West. It became a reference frame to argue against the conservative approach, branding the imitation of the West as heresy or disbelief. The second direction is, we can find it in the contemporary research studies in the universities. Research focus, in the Arab universities, especially in the Maghreb, on juridical and jurisprudential issues without any empirical impact on jurisprudence. This was conducted without isolating Maqasid from the idea of analogy in the study of Islamic legal theory, usul al-fiqh. In addition, this involved an attempt to regulate the relation between a text and its purpose at this stage. At this stage, the Maqasid-based interest derailed from the renewal approach which prevailed in the preceding phase. The third direction here that we can know now from all this intensive discussion, dealing with Maqasid from a moral perspective and driving it outside the scope of jurisprudence, sometimes injecting them into the field of humanities in general, and sometimes the field of moral philosophy. So now we are talking, and we are a part of the third direction. So let's go to the second point, or the second main point, that to focus on Taha Abdurrahman's view on Maqasid Sharia. He's a philosopher. He's the most important moral philosopher in the Arab world. nowadays. And he wrote many books. He's very intellectual and very intensive work. He provided very intensive works in different disciplines. So Maqasid as a moral philosophy. Taha Abdurrahman is the most prominent scholar in Arabic world who presents an integrated and detailed study of the relationship between maqasid and ethics. Taha's paradigm was first presented in 1994 in his book Renewal of the Method and Assessing the Tradition, تجديد المنهج وتقويم التراث in Arabic. He then revised and published it in the Al-Muslim Al-Mu'asir journal, Contemporary Muslim, if we can translate the name, the title, I mean the journal, in Egypt in 2002. However, it did not receive the proper attention it deserves. The journal announced that it published this view for debate in an attempt to evade the responsibility of publishing such a critical view on legal theory and jurisprudence that is contrary to other visions by scholars working on maqasid. Subsequently, other works were made available, such as a book by Noura Bouhannash, she is Algerian, for which she obtained a PhD degree. However, this book is closer to philosophy than maqasid and legal theory, and it is lacking in depth. Do you see the first one that we mention a woman that in the critical context? Finally, several articles have been published on Taha Abdurrahman's view or have been based on it, but they failed to contribute any notable addition. Taha Abdurrahman puts forward a different view of maqasid from an ethical perspective. He believes that ethics determines the nature of mankind. In other words, humans are distinguished from other creatures by being ethical in nature. This made him thinking outside the box of the Greek conception, where the man characterizes mankind, when the mind characterizes the mankind as a rational being. That humans are moral beings relates all their acts to a higher or lower moral value, where their humanness increases or decreases according to the acts they perform, whether such acts are cognitive or material. Taha Abdurrahman defines the concept of maqasid as the discipline of righteousness, as-salah. Yeah. That answers the question, how can a person be righteous? Or how do humans perform good deeds? Do you know the same question where the Greek philosophers and even the contemporary philosophers are concerned with the same question, but from different angle. So I have read the book written by Jürgen Habermas, the German philosopher. He was discussing the genetic intervention nowadays from ethical. He was trying to give an ethical answer to this question. So he started with this question. So the question of ethics among him is searching for criteria to live or living with the consistent criteria. So the main question, this is the main question for philosophers in general. So he approaches, Taha Abdurrahman here approaches Maqasid Sharia from the same question that the philosopher used to address. So he sees that, or he thinks that Maqasid answer the question, how can a person be righteous, salih, or how do humans perform good deeds. He believes that righteousness is a supreme ethical value under which all other moral values fall. الصلاح هي القيمة العليا. Righteousness is a more accurate term than goodness, khair, and happiness, sa'ada. So it's more accurate than happiness and goodness. Because righteousness, salah, is associated with behavior, but goodness is used to refer to numerous entities such as fortunes and blessings. On the other hand, happiness is associated with a purpose. Hence, righteousness is the most expressive term reflecting the ethical aspect, namely righteous behavior that is not associated with a purpose. الصلاح فعل من دون غرض. The core issue of Taha Abdurrahman's view is that the concept of maqasid has three different meanings like the following. I already mentioned this briefly yesterday. The first one is al-maqsud. Al-maqasid بمعنى al-maqsud, the meaning. The semantic content of the lawgiver's message concerning the acts of the legally competent individuals, al-mukallaf. That is meaningful content without which speech is merely vain. The second meaning of maqasid بمعنى المقصود القصد. The first meaning is al-maqsud. The second meaning is al-qasd. Maqasid بمعنى القصد, the intention. It is the voluntary content, like the intention underlying the utterance, without which the words are thoughtless. The intention is based on two aspects. The first one, will and purposefulness. The second one is the mukallaf individuals are called upon to uphold pure intention in all their acts, since it constitutes the criterion that determines the moral value of the acts to be judged as beneficial or harmful. The third meaning for maqasid is maqasid in the Arabic term, which means al-hikmah, or the purpose, al-ghaya or al-hadaf. It is the value content, that is, the judgment is associated with a specific objective that it intends to achieve. If this is not the case, the utterance would be vain or meaningless. So each action, human action, should have three meanings, three levels of meaning or types of meanings: meaning and intention and the purpose. Combining between these three meanings means that your action is ethical. According to Taha Abdurrahman, the study of maqasid, which has been considered a subfield of jurisprudence but has not received the attention granted to other subfields, needs developing along the following lines. Number one, considering it as Islamic ethics. He's trying to formulate Maqasid Sharia as a moral philosophy, and trying to approach it methodologically, benefiting from the recent developments in this methodology, as well as the appropriate ethical theories that resulted from these new developments. The second point, to develop Maqasid Sharia, for his opinion, creating three major sections for Islamic ethics: the theory of acts, the theory of intentions, the theory of values, based on the three meanings that already mentioned for the Maqasid, where the theory of values is ranked first, followed by the theory of intentions and the theory of acts, respectively. So number one is the purpose, the theory of objectives. Number two, the theory of intentions. And number three is the theory of meaning or actions here, because the meaning reflects the action. You act based on the meaning, a specific meaning. The third point, he criticized the materialistic overtone in the traditional scheme on Maqasid. According to him, this scheme is mainly concerned with achieving material benefit for the human being, like his life, his health, intellectual capacities, and getting children. These are materialistic, and he's Sufis. So he's focusing on the meaning and the spiritual dimensions, which comes in the highest level. Number four, to develop the Maqasid Sharia, for his opinion, is striving to highlight the exact correlations between ethics and jurisprudence in Sharia, where ethics serves as the basis of which jurisprudence is founded, while jurisprudence serves as a regulator guiding ethics in preparation for establishing and outstanding Islamic theory. This theory would contribute to solving the problematic issue which has always been perplexing to scholars down the ages, to the extent that it has turned into a global crisis for contemporary scholars. In other words, how to integrate legally binding and morally binding provisions in such a way that special ethical principles are capable of bridging the gaps in public laws. The 5 points to develop Maqasid as a moral philosophy is explaining the fact that moderation, wasatiyya, is not achieved by resorting the leniency in some of the Islamic rulings through repealing them, constraining their scope of or being selective in concerning them, in enforcing them. It is rather about closely linking jurisprudence with ethics, with the mean of developing a balanced behavior at both the individual and social levels. Now, my critical comments to this approach are as the following. Bringing us back to the Maqasid-based approach, which is by itself problematic. However, the sciences related to fiqh and usul have been functioning throughout history and up to the moment, despite the critiques expressed about them. Blurs the boundaries between maqasid, fiqh, usul, and ethics, as we can see in the view of Taha Abdurrahman. So we cannot differentiate, we cannot realize what are the boundaries between all these disciplines, in his opinion. The question here, do we really need to stick to the term akhlaq, and do we have here an attempt to involve ethics for whatever reason in every scholarly discipline? So why are we committed so much to have the term ethics? The term, not the concepts. So, and why are we trying to restrict ourselves to the contemporary approaches in the Western moral philosophy? Why don't we try to explore our internal logic and spirit, which is existing in the tradition and which is very rich, as I explained yesterday? So why do we need to establish a new discipline which is called moral philosophy, as it is now in the Western philosophy? We have the same meaning, and we have more richer than a tradition richer than what it is existing in the Greek philosophy and the modern philosophy. But it doesn't mean that it's already mature. We have to work on it and explore it and develop it based on the internal spirit of the tradition and based on the modern challenges that the modernity, the Western modernity, provide us nowadays, and we have to answer these questions. We cannot avoid these questions, contemporary and modern questions. We have to give answers. But at the same time, we are not restricted to think the same way. So, in my opinion, it was Taha Abdurrahman just dedicated this chapter in the book that he wrote in 1994, and he revised the same ideas in an article, but he didn't dedicate a book, an independent book for his theory. And I think I'm in contact with him. I think he is planning to write a book, a specific book on this theory, to give details and try to answer all the questions and critical questions, and to develop Maqasid Sharia as a moral philosophy. So till now, we have these main points. I didn't want to go in depth with some technical and very technical details and very intensive details. I just wanted to give you briefly the main ideas that he mentioned, because he has a lot of details to rebuild Maqasid Sharia as a moral philosophy. So I didn't want to go in depth to make the general idea easy, because it's not easy even in Arabic. His type of writing is very intensive and very problematic even in Arabic. So this is why I just gave you the outline of his ideas, the main ideas. Now, but he didn't explain to us how can we answer the question that he already raised. How can we break this distinction between ethics and law in the contemporary time, in the public laws nowadays? So it's not clear, because it was an article. He's not supposed to give all the details in his article. He just raised the general theory in his opinion. Okay, I will stop here. So if you have any questions, I'm not going to, maybe I will add some other points. I will leave some time for you to ask and comment, and I will add my ideas regarding to this, and how can we build an Islamic ethical theory based on the cross disciplines, Islamic sciences. How can we benefit from the ethical discussions raised by different disciplines in Islamic studies in general, philosophy, theology, Sufism, genre of adab, and we have three types of adab: the professional adab, the adab shar'iyya, and literature, the adab that we can find in the Maraya al-Umara and in the political traditions. So we have three types of adab even. So all these branches of knowledge have ethical dimensions and discussions, and which are very rich. But we have to analyze and to combine all these dimensions to come up with a new theory, maybe we can call it. At the beginning of my lecture yesterday, I explained why Maqasid is still problematic, because it's not clear the relationship between Maqasid and for many reasons. The first, number one, is the concept of Maqasid, as you saw now. So the concept of Maqasid itself is not clear. And this is why Taha Abdurrahman said that we have three types of Maqasid, the meaning of Maqasid, and it's not distinguishable in the Islamic tradition, and we have to do that. So this is his idea. Nobody before him differentiate between these three levels of three types of the meaning. So, and he's right. If we read the Islamic tradition and the sources, even if we read the Shatibi's work, there's no distinction between these three levels. So if he differentiates between these three levels, that could help us to understand deeply and more the theory. So the concept of maqasid is still problematic. Is it the hikmah? Is it the illa? Is it the masalih? And what's the difference between these terms, maslaha, hikmah, illa, maqsid? So still it's a controversial issue. I mean, the terminology itself. This is number one. Number two, the role of maqasid itself. And this is why I raised the main question yesterday. Is maqasid a methodology to produce ahkam rulings, or it's just to help us to reveal what is the rational behind the rulings, the existing rulings already? So this is the main question that it's not answered yet. And the most Muslim jurists refuse to use maqasid as a methodology to produce rulings. They don't accept this. The majority of Muslim jurists don't accept this, even today. So they use maqasid just to rationalize the existing rulings, or if there is no, they didn't find. They couldn't practice the analogy in based on the traditional existing rulings, so they come to maqasid to give an answer. So it's luju' ila al-maqasid like darura. So they don't use maqasid to produce new rulings. They don't do that. So this is the second point. The third point, why it's still problematic, is the relationship between maqasid and usul is not clear yet, and maqasid and fuqh. So these are the three main points why it's still problematic. And a lot of studies that were made in this regard didn't help us to understand deeply the discipline, but it make it more problematic. So I think I explained that yesterday. Why? Yeah. Thank you. Professor Ramadan will answer your questions. So as for me, that still this discipline is in progress, and I am working on this, and my colleagues are working on this. So to come up later with the specific answers. But even this is, we will try to answers, but it will not never be the final answer or the mature answers, because these are very controversial questions and deep questions. So, and it should be developed with in the scholarship in general to be accumulated by scholars, generation by generation. I think. So I'm not able to answer all these questions, but I'm working. I'm trying to help now in this regard, in this session, to understand the problem itself deeply, and based on the information and the history of the ideas. You know, this is what I'm trying to do now. I'm not supposed to give you the full answers now, but in the discussion we can address some questions and try to give some answers. But still, the field itself is in progress, as I explained yesterday. The field of ethics itself, still in progress. I think I mentioned some points in my introduction, or in my first month, regarding to this issue. If we are talking about the late 19th century, it was to adapt with the West, with the European with the European modernity, and to gain the progress. كيف نتقدم? Because the main question that in the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century was, how can we progress as the West progressed? كيف نتقدم كما تقدموا? This was the main question. And those reformists invested Maqasid Sharia in this regard, to go out, or to go beyond, not out, to go beyond the Islamic jurisprudence, because they thought that the tradition is not able enough to address the contemporary issues that were raised by the European modernity at that time. So this was the first step. The second step, the motivation, that was scholarly discipline. And this is why we have a lot, like hundreds of works on Maqasid Sharia in Morocco only, you know, Moroccan universities. So, and with no notable addition. Most of them, you will not find. A lot of people wrote on Maqasid Sharia, but with no notable addition. So it became like a part of the technical studies in the Islamic studies field. The third motivation that I already mentioned now, like Professor Ramadan and others, I already mentioned, those who feel that there is a problem and there are critical questions in the modern time, and we have to address these questions. And this is why they are trying to repositioning the authority and the references. So ethics is central in this regard, not fiqh. In their opinion, like for example, for Taha Abdurrahman, the spiritual life is central, not the materialistic, and he's trying to think out of the Greek philosophy, and this is why he's very critical to the Western modernity, and he wrote many books to criticize deeply the Western modernity. So he's against of the modernity, but he's not against of the spirit of the modernity. And this is why he wrote a book, specific book. He dedicated a book on the spirit of modernity. he supports the spirit of the modernity, but not the Western modernity. So, and this is why his book was entitled Ruh al-Hadatha. So he's trying to use Ruh al-Hadatha, but not al-Hadatha al-Gharbiyya. So the spirit of modernity, but not the Western modernity. Because of many reasons, the sources and the philosophy behind this, and the different experience and the spirituality. So we can talk about different motivations for this time. Yeah, he's very critical, and his critiques are very deeply. So he's aware of that, and he reads the primary sources in German, French, English, and he knows the Greek philosophy well, because he knows the Greek language, and so he knows well the whole traditional philosophy, the traditions in philosophy in the Greek and contemporary times.
You're supposed to do.
Yes, I'm not critical to him because of this. I'm critical to his view because he didn't solve the problems. So he has the right to be critical, and has the right to be critical to him and to the West at the same time. Exactly. No. He's trying to provide us. The philosophy is not to raise the questions. No, the philosophy, one of its major role to give answers, to provide answers to. Yes. Yeah. Yes.
I'm just wondering, it's actually a question.
In the applied cases, and this what Habermas did now. He was necessary to answer a modern question in the applied ethics. Okay. Developing the way of thinking is one of the main objectives nowadays. So sometimes we should to develop the way of thinking, and to develop new questions without answers is one of the objectives. So we will never have the final answers. And sometimes we are supposed to rethink of the same questions to try to provide different answers for our times to the same questions that were raised at some point. So this is the first point. The second point, I would like to, sometimes we are supposed to give answers. If we are talking about the practical level of the life, like applied ethics nowadays, you have to give an answer. And you are supposed to come up with specific answer. If you deal with bioethics, for example, nowadays, you have to come with answer, because you cannot live without answers, and you have to choose and to take an action in the hospital, or if you are a doctor or a patient or whatever. So at some levels, when you come to the Islamic jurisprudence, to fiqh, the mufti or the Muslim jurist has to give an answer. But if I am a philosopher, or I'm talking about the moral philosophy, no, I'm not supposed to give answers most of the time, like you said. But if you are addressing a practical issue, you have to come with an answer. So this is why Taha Abdurrahman, when dealt or addressed jurisprudence and usul al-fiqh, the theory, the Islamic legal theory, he has to come with a mature view and perspective, because he's talking about a practical field. So you should come to at the end and you should produce fatwas. So if I told you now, if I discussed and wrote many books on practical issues in the theoretical level, but nobody will care about my writings, because at the end, the human being will come, the individuals will come to the mufti to ask him, should I do this or not? So what will do? So my presentations will not help them to to develop these answers. Because I'm talking about the level, the theoretical level now. So I'm not mufti, and I'm not going to be mufti, and I don't like to be there, like the same. But I'm trying to develop the way of thinking and to help people to think deeply to think deeply of the unthinkable issues. And this is why we are not supposed to give final answers or even answers all the time. So I agree, I support you with what you said, that we have to develop the way of thinking and the new answers, and to raise critical questions. The third point that regarding to this, before I go, what time should I leave? I'm supposed to leave? Huh? You can come.
Can I, just your last point, are you trying to influence the mufti?
I'm trying to question the knowledge that the mufti use and invest to produce his fatwa. So I'm questioning his knowledge and his sources and his methodology that help him to produce fatwa. You know. Hopefully, of course, he will be influenced by this, if he accepted these critiques and rethink of his methodology and his way of producing fatwa, or issuing fatwas. Because yesterday I said the mufti explore, not produce. Yeah. The last question. This is a problematic point. I cannot answer with 1 minute because of the methodology. Because it's not regulated, and it's not mature enough to help him to deal with the practical issues. So he has to go to the methodology of usul fiqh, and that methodology helps him to issuing fatwa. Yesterday I said that we have sources, and we have norms, qawa'id, and then we have methodology that help us to derive ahkam, rulings from sources and norms to come to the applied cases. You know, so Maqasid is not mature enough to help him with this process, but its Maqasid comes at the first level with the sources and the criteria that help him to judge, or to based on his judgment on it. You know, this is why. No, I did that in my research. You can read my article, which is entitled the Al-Wazifa Al-Maqasidiyya in Arabic. I addressed Al-Shatibi and Al-Juwayni and their context and why they raised this question. So, Dr. Tariq will answer this question.